Today on Capitol Hill, Attorney General Pam Bondi faced a barrage of questions over a range of issues, from the handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files to the fatal shootings of 2 U.S. citizens in Minnesota by federal officers.
Bondi repeatedly sparred with lawmakers and at times engaged in shouting matches and left many questions unanswered. The tense exchanges unfolding with Epstein survivors seated just behind her. Our Allie Rogan has more.
Mr. Chairman.
On Capitol Hill, few answers and many insults.
I am reclaiming my time, and when I reclaim my time, it is
Mr. Chairman, the gentlelady has reclaimed her time.
I'm not going to get in the gutter for
questions unresolved. Adding to the charged atmosphere, survivors connected to the Epstein case sat just behind her, watching the tense proceedings unfold in real time. Meanwhile, Bondi's aggressive, tough-on-crime strategy suffered a major legal setback when federal Judge Timothy Kelly issued a sweeping 35-page ruling dismantling the approach. Kelly, originally appointed to the bench by Donald Trump, concluded that the process used by the Justice Department appeared designed to justify decisions that had already been made. His ruling stressed that the government cannot stage procedural reviews merely to rubber-stamp predetermined outcomes, making it clear that such tactics violate the basic principles of due process. The decision served as a blunt reminder that constitutional protections are not optional or selective, even when dealing with prisoners accused of crimes many Americans find unforgivable. Importantly, the judge did not argue for their release, nor suggest innocence. Instead, he underscored that due process applies universally. In a striking passage, Kelly acknowledged the severity of the crimes involved, but emphasized that constitutional rights still stand. As he wrote, "The Constitution protects notorious prisoners and law-abiding citizens alike, and the process the government provides cannot be a sham," a pointed rebuke to the Justice Department's methods. All of this unfolded as Bondi endured nearly 5 hours of relentless questioning before the House Judiciary Committee, turning what was meant to be routine oversight into a chaotic and politically charged confrontation that left Washington buzzing long after the hearing ended.
As I stated earlier, I was not in office. I was not confirmed when that was handled.
So does that
Deputy Attorney General Blanche and Director Patel said that there was no evidence that Tom Homan committed a crime. Yet now you're putting his picture up to slander him.
No, I'm putting his picture up,
pointing out that she wasn't even in office when some of these issues actually happened.
In which
Bondi,
he was asked explicitly about these allegations that he took a $50,000 bribe.
But then things got even uglier.
He refused to answer.
When the name Tom Homan came up, and with it a very specific allegation,
the money, so
a $50,000 bribe,
did he take the money?
Directly,
Senator Schiff, I answered that question.
And instead of answering the question, she insisted she had already answered it numerous times. That's not an answer. That's a dodge dressed up as one, but the moment that hit hardest, it wasn't even about the bribery. Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, women who were trafficked, raped, and whose lives were torn apart, were seated directly behind Pam Bondi in that hearing room. They weren't there as props. They were there with their pain, their scars, their unhealed wounds. And Bondi never turned around. She never acknowledged them. When Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal told her to face the survivors, she didn't move. When they raised their hands, unanimously, to show that the Justice Department had refused to even meet with them, Bondi stared straight ahead. And when confronted about her department leaking their private information, she called it theatrics. She called abuse survivors showing up to never turned around. She never acknowledged them. When Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal told her to face the survivors, she didn't move. When they raised their hands, unanimously, to show that the Justice Department had refused to even meet with them, Bondi stared straight ahead. And when confronted about her department leaking their private information, she called it theatrics. She called abuse survivors showing up to demand accountability theatrics. This is the person who is supposed to be the top law enforcement officer in the United States. The person meant to stand up for victims, and she couldn't even face them. Back in December 2024, as President Biden was winding down his final weeks in office, he made a major decision. He commuted the death sentences of 37 out of 40 federal death row inmates, converting them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Let's be clear. These people aren't getting out. They will still die in prison. Biden's reasoning was his long-standing moral opposition to the death penalty. It was a presidential act, entirely within his legal authority. Trump was furious. On his very first day back in office, January 2025, He signed an executive order directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to ensure these inmates were treated in a manner consistent with, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the severity of what they did and the danger they posed. Translation: make life as hard as possible for them, regardless of what the law or the Bureau of Prisons says, and Bondi was ready to deliver. She went on television and boldly declared that these men would be sent to ADX Florence, the supermax prison in Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This is not an ordinary prison. This is where you send the most dangerous, high-security federal inmates in the entire country. The Boston Marathon bomber is there, El Chapo is there, the Unabomber. Cells barely bigger than a parking space. A sliver of sky through a narrow window. One former inmate recalled going 13 full days without hearing another human voice. It is by design one of the most psychologically brutal environments the federal government operates. And Bondi announced on national television, that's where these 37 inmates were going. Here's the thing about the Bureau of Prisons. It has a process. A real established process for determining where inmates should be housed. Individual evaluations, security risk assessments, health considerations, behavioral history. Before Trump ever signed that executive order, the Bureau of Prisons had already gone through this process for all 37 inmates whose sentences Biden commuted. And the conclusion? Not a single one of them was found suitable for transfer to ADX Florence. Not one. The actual experts, the people whose literal job is to figure out where dangerous inmates belong, looked at each case individually and said no. But the administration didn't care about the experts. They ran the process anyway, a fake process. A shell of a review designed to look legitimate while producing an outcome that had already been decided. Christopher Sisvel, an attorney with the Bureau of Prisons, later acknowledged that the transfers weren't based on security assessments or available resources. They were based on Trump's executive order and Bondi's memo. The experts said no. The politicians said yes. So the politicians made the experts say yes too, and they called it a review. Judge Kelly saw right through it. He called the process a cookie-cutter operation, 20 identical outcomes for 20 different individuals, all pointing to the exact same destination that the president had already announced on TV before the so-called review even started. He called it an empty exercise. He pointed out that it's hard to believe lower-level prison officials felt they had any real ability to disagree when their bosses, the president and the attorney general, had already told the country exactly where these people were going. What were they supposed to say? No to the attorney general? And here's what makes this so particularly brutal for Bondi: the timing. The very day the judge was writing that opinion, Bondi was sitting in front of the House Judiciary Committee, getting grilled about the Epstein files. She was already in the fire, and now a judge was pouring gasoline on it from the other direction. Ranking Democrat Hank Johnson accused her of running a massive cover-up from inside the Department of Justice, protecting the perpetrators and abandoning the victims. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal literally told Bondi to turn around and look at the survivors seated behind her. Women whose private information was leaked by the very department Bondi runs. Women who had reached out to the Justice Department and been ignored. And when they were asked, every single survivor in that room raised their hand. Every single one. Unanimously confirming the Justice Department had refused to meet with them. Bondi sat there, staring forward. And when pressed on why her department leaked these women's private details, she called their response theatrics. Then came the question about Trump's connection to Epstein, the elephant in every room. And her response? She started talking about the stock market. A congressman raises sex trafficking, and out comes the Dow Jones. And what makes this worse? It's not just Democrats calling this a disaster. Joe Rogan went on air and said the handling of the Epstein files looks terrible, and questioned why everything hasn't been fully released. A far-right broadcaster called for Bondi to either be fired or resign. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, who helped write the law meant to make those files public, grilled Bondi in the hearing for over-redacting the names of powerful individuals while simultaneously exposing the private details of victims. And now there are allegations that the Department of Justice was monitoring which members of Congress were accessing the Epstein files, essentially watching what lawmakers were looking into. Democrats are calling it a covert surveillance operation and demanding it stop immediately. This isn't just about one bad week for Pam Bondi. There's a pattern here that goes far beyond her, far beyond the supermax ruling, and it stretches across this entire administration's relationship with the law. Here's how it works. The administration announces a bold, tough-sounding policy. They go on television. They put their names on executive orders. They make promises. And then it hits the actual legal system, and it collapses. A grand jury saw no grounds to indict 6 Democratic lawmakers. A judge blocked Hegseth from demoting Mark Milley. A judge stopped these supermax transfers. The Supreme Court blocked the National Guard deployment to Chicago. Judges have dismissed cases against James Comey and Letitia James. Grand juries have refused to re-indict James twice. The courts have become the one institution consistently saying, no, not like this. And every time they hit that wall, they act surprised, they attack the judge, they call the ruling political, and they try again. The supermax ruling is actually a perfect case study. The judge didn't rule that ADX Florence is unconstitutional. He didn't rule that these inmates can never be sent there. All he said was that you can't have the president and the Attorney General announcing on national television exactly where prisoners are going, and then pretend the internal review was somehow independent, fair, and genuine. Their own words, caught on camera, undid them. It's a fair question. And here's the honest answer. This isn't about sympathy for convicted killers. It's about a principle that protects everyone. Due process means the government cannot decide your fate without a real hearing. The review has to be genuine, not a formality, not a rubber stamp, not a press conference with paperwork. If they can skip those rules for the most despised people, in America, they can skip them for anyone. That's not a slippery slope argument. That's exactly what we're watching happen across the entire Justice Department right now. They bypassed procedure trying to indict members of Congress over a video. They sidestepped proper process going after the Federal Reserve. In Wisconsin, they arrested a county judge, ignoring every established protocol. The pattern is always the same. Political decision first, legal justification scrambled together second. And if a judge says no, attack the judge and try again. For an attorney general, credibility isn't just nice to have, and it's the whole job. And Bondi's credibility is being dismantled from every direction simultaneously. Her department leaked sensitive information about Epstein survivors. The department refused to meet with victims. They redacted the names of powerful people while exposing the identities of the abused. She sat before Congress and dismissed survivors' testimony as theatrics. Conservative voices from within Trump's own coalition are calling for her resignation. The DOJ is now accused of spying on lawmakers reviewing files. And Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick just admitted he spent time at Epstein's island. After years of claiming he'd cut all ties, and through all of this, not a single new Epstein indictment. Zero. She has been Attorney General for over a year. The tally of new Epstein prosecutions stands at nothing. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted sex trafficker, was quietly moved from a federal prison in Florida to a minimum security camp in Texas. A placement she normally wouldn't even qualify for as a registered sex offender. This happened right after she had a 2-day meeting with Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General and Donald Trump's former personal defense attorney. Let that land for a second. The convicted trafficker gets a cushier prison placement. The abuse survivors get their private information leaked, and the Attorney General calls their reaction theatrics. We have an Attorney General whose reputation is in free fall, a Justice Department that keeps getting humiliated in court, an Epstein investigation with 0 new indictments after more than a year, and a Trump-appointed judge who just declared the entire supermax plan a sham. Bondi came into this role with a clear vision for herself. Be the face of law and order. Make headlines about toughness, punish the worst of the worst, send killers to the hardest prison on earth. Strong messaging, bold statements. But she skipped over something every first-year law student learns in Constitutional Law 101. You can't run a sham review and call it due process. You can't announce outcomes before hearings happen and pretend those hearings were real. You can't sit in front of Congress with abuse survivors behind you and dismiss their presence as theatrics. Judges notice, grand juries notice, and the public eventually notices, maybe not today, maybe not this week. But the scoreboard is being kept. The losses, the reprimands, the moments where court after court says not like this, and it adds up. And that right there is the story of this Justice Department. Not law and order, not toughness. Just noise. Big, loud, TV-ready noise that falls apart the moment someone with a law degree and a gavel takes a real look at the Constitution.